We'll give this opportunity now to Frank to teach us more about complex composition with Compose. Thank you so much, Frank. Take it over.
So hi guys. My name. Let me try and share the screen first. There you go. I think you should have it live now. Cool. Boom. Yeah, you can see it, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool, awesome. So my name is Tamre. I'm going to take you guys through the complex compositioning with Jetpack Compose. And just like Kenny, I'm going to just like explain some stuff. And this is not a beginner session. I'm just going to put it out there. It's not a beginner session. So my assumption is that you have probably tried out Compose and you've looked at it. And you have an idea of what it is. So this is not like a hello world, or this is what Jetpack Compose is. No, my assumption, the pure assumption for this talk is that you have experience with Compose, not maybe even if it's not that much. And also you have some, and even as you're working, you have like you work from like a design-based system. You have a designer in the team, and then the designer gives the designs. And then once the designer gives the designs, your work is to do the implementation. So that's where I'm going to be approaching this talk from. But if you're not, if maybe you are starting out or you don't have a lot of knowledge on Jetpack Compose, this is no worries. I'll try and see how I can break down this sort of like conversation to make it easier for you. Yeah, and also I think the other thing that I need to mention is that this is part of a series of talks that I'm actually doing. So who am I? I do, 1 second, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I build stuff. So I build stuff with different programming languages. Just as I think I'm seeing, I have friends also who are both Flutter and Kotlin at the same time. So I do that. And for me, unfortunately, I have to do a lot of like context switching for the two. I find it easier now that we have Flutter and Jetpack Compose. More or less like the same things. Like I can use knowledge from one side and then literally invert it to the other side, more or less, not directly, but like have that ability to sort of like switch it. And then I also teach people stuff to do programming, obviously, and now swimming and some fitness stuff. And then I organize people to do things. This is with like Kotlin, with Android, and also Azure. And then I write a bunch of stuff, books, both fictional and blogs. Swim, run, garden stuff, and yeah, and I have this website. It doesn't have many things at the moment, but if you visit it, I think it has an ability for you to get in touch with me, and I actually am responsive. And then also on Twitter, but I'll tell you the truth, I am not active on Twitter. Now I feel like I go there rarely, and I feel like it's easier for you to get me on GitHub, and I'll share with you about all that information later on. So that's who I am. These are all the many things that I try and do. Let me remove this, and yeah, sorry. Okay, let me just remove this one here. Okay, cool. Yeah, so those are like the many things that I am involved in. But yeah, so over and above that, the thing that we want to talk about today is, and this is the agenda, is going to talk about composition. And then what's the ugly thing about the way I do the complexity of it, the good, and then like a live code demo, and then Q&A section. So as I said, it's complex compositioning. So the assumption is you already know some bits to do it just per compose. You've done something with it. Even if you've built a layout, it's fine. It's good. It's like you're in a good position for us to say. When I say experience with it, I don't mean that you're probably playing around with it from alpha. No. I think I decided to create a halt most of the time when Google is releasing products, in that I look at it and I'm like, I'm not touching on this now because it's still on alpha. Until they release it, it's like it's stable. That's when I can literally delve into it. Once or twice I touch on the alpha parts, but that bit of experience with Compose is me assuming that you're in a position to at least build a layout, and you have that understanding of, oh, okay, wait, these are the bits that are involved, because it would be a waste of time if you say, oh yeah, this is what this is, then this is what this is. But there are different resources that can easily get you up to speed, and some of these resources include things like the code labs, YouTube videos and tutorials where people go through it. And even courses, I've seen like courses that already started popping up with Jetpack Compose, and they're touching on different things. Others are general, but the assumption is you have that understanding of it. So when we talk about that complexity in terms of Jetpack Compose, my focus is not actually on that bit of Jetpack Compose. It's that bit of compositioning and how you're doing it. And I know probably compositioning is not an English word. I do not know if it is an English word, but I'm creating it on the fly. So what it involves is we have to talk about like composition. And this is where I'm actually going to draw like experience from what I have been doing or what we do, and that is at AliCamp. So I run this thing called AliCamp, and currently we are building out solutions for kids. And so we've touched on Flutter a bit. We've touched on also Kotlin a bit. And so we were looking at the two, and me being as one of the leads there, one of the decisions you had to make was, will we build all the tools with Jetpack or with Kotlin, or do we use Flutter? And so we have some things, I guess, because at that moment, Flutter was more Flutter web for that matter. We could actually write code once and have it both on Android and iOS, and it was already on a stable version, and some people had already started shipping out with it. We had already started doing progress in terms of building these tools for kids to teach them programming had already started, and also for parents to monitor their kids as they're learning code had already started. And so that's why we did that. And so when we were looking at the mobile aspect of it, especially for the Android app, we wanted like a native app that people could use. And so based on the knowledge or the experience that we were already using with Flutter in terms of how are we creating tools or resources for people to actually use. So within the team itself, we have developers. So it looks like, oh, we just come and teach kids how to program. No, we actually have developers, and I have the privilege of like being that person who's sort of like leading them. And so over the years, we find that my passion has always been, how do I create tools for developers and not just like building out for let's say the last facing user. So you'll find that if it's an app that is being built, my passion is more or less like, how do I sit behind to say, I have these other junior developers or developers within the team, or even other senior developers. So how do I build tools or solutions or things that can enable them to build this app out very well? So after you've done the architecting and all that bit, how do you now build these things in between? And that's where I see it at. And that's where you'll find that even the philosophy of what I want to use is derived from. And so this philosophy is not something that is new. It's something that has been there already, and people have sort of like been using it. And so mine is more or less like that bit of a component-based system. If you want to know this, you sort of like look at the atomic way. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. His name is Brad, I think, Frost, if I'm not wrong. And so mine was playing around with a lot of all this like component-based system, where the focus for this is not, let's say if you want to build a text, you don't just like write text and then you put it out there and then you release it, or people can use it and the display and the user can interact with it. No, it's like, how do you think about the final displays or the final UI elements that the user is going to interact with in terms of can this be a component, and this component is that it sort of like has these 4 or 5 behind layers that are people that is actually developed such that if I want to reuse this, it can be used everywhere. And I think that's one of the things as to why I'm actually happy with the whole introduction of Jetpack Compose, because Jetpack Compose is if you ask me, it's a very reactive way and very expressive way of you to express your UIs and your layout compared to the XML system. It was good, but it had a lot of buts, but I'm really a huge fan of that bit of how do you make it more or less like a component-based system. And the fun part is that you're still writing with Kotlin, and so it's easy for you to create things and just like move on with it. So with all this philosophy of that bit of component-based system, where you put the component first, instead of you having the UI being the first priority, is that if you're sitting within your team, the priority is, how do I create these components? That's the focus of creating components. And if you've played around with Jetpack Compose, like all these components are the ones that will be reused. You can reuse them all through your UI. So there is no need for you to have a similar, if you're building something like a news application, there's no need for you to have a similar, like text all over. You can just have it named in a certain way and revert to it having that bit of a component, and then reusing it all through your application. And so you create it once and then you can reuse it all these other places. But then the priority here is you saying, I'm going to design this such that I decide on the color, I decide on the font earlier on, such that when I start doing the implementation, I am good to go. Then, and so with this component-based system, the process that I normally prefer to use, or the process that we prefer to use, is that we'll compose a bunch of things. And so in order of how we compose it is we start by composing all these atoms. And under this component-based system, it's where now you put a lot of emphasis on, like, so what is the process now? So in terms of the process, I'm looking at when I'm the process that we follow when we are composing our UIs or our layouts at the moment is that we have this emphasis on us starting by, first of all, thinking about the atoms. And by the atoms here, what we mean is in every digital sort of like interaction or digital product that will ever be created that has a user at the end of it all, there's usually two things at the bottom of it all, and these are like those atoms, and that is like text and color. And the text and color in this in sort of like in this way of thinking in this component-based design system is that you have these are the two things that you can quickly test out. And once you have these two things put in order, the rest of the things sort of like are built on top of that. And so text, color, you play around with those things. Obviously, there are shapes that come into being here. And I like what Jetpack comes in and extends what atoms are in terms of there are now shapes in this. There are now shapes in with regards to like how we build our product. And so these shapes are, if you look at a button, you're thinking of a button in terms of like, there's that either, for instance, if we say it's like a rounded, it's not like, you can say a rectangle, but what kind of a rectangle is it? The edges are rounded, and you know, and they're rounded, you clip them at, what is the amount of clipping that you're putting at the end of this, at the end of this rectangle of it all. And then you have a color that is put within the bounds of the rectangle, and then you have text on top of it. And so you're playing around with shapes, colors, shapes, colors, and type, which is text for that matter. And so if you're thinking about your products, or you're thinking about the UI, any layer that you have, is they're mostly around that. Yes, you can say images, but not all websites have images. Not all sort of like digital solutions will need images for that matter. It's these texts, icons, you know, you'd call them also as atoms, but I feel like they start going to a slightly higher level. And so you can bring in shapes here. That is the lines, whatever will be in your website, in your application. And so you have your shapes, you have your text, you have your color, and even you can have your images as atoms. And so once you define all this, and you'll find like most of the time, if people are laying it out, is that how do you know these atoms? As I said earlier, is that most of the time when I'm thinking about, or this talk is actually for those people who you have a designer, or you're using like a UI, so like guide for you to build the code. And if you do not have that sort of like a UI guide, it slightly becomes harder for you to start thinking about, oh, these are the atoms that you might need in our website and stuff like that. And then the next bit is for you to say, okay, cool, I have my atoms. Then the next thing is now the elements are now what sometimes I like saying these are the components of the elements. And so the elements are built from the atoms. And so if you're thinking of an element, what would be an example of an element here is we're thinking about, look at your, for instance, button. Yeah. And so for you to easily build this button is that you will use a couple of atoms, and those atoms that you use is text and color. And so I'll have my bounded area, and then I'll have my text there, and then I'll have my color there. And so if it's text, I've already defined and say this is a button text, and this is how I'm going to use it, you know, going down. And that's like how you'd actually create that bit of moving from like an atom, and then you move to an element now. And these elements now is where elements or components can get as diverse and as complex as you want it to be. And they really, the beauty of now thinking about it in terms of like this component-based system is that it makes you think about your whole product from the end going backwards. And most of the time it's like a designer is always going to give you these designs. And once it gives you the designs, you start thinking about, okay, fine, can I build this button? Can I build this? And then you start layering them out finally on a layout. And so in terms of these layouts now is you have now the final bit that now the different, let's say a developer or a user will come and interact with. And so how do you get to have very complex layouts? Again, that's a talk for another session. Now, I really want to limit this conversation around atoms and elements, and now you put them in just quote unquote simple layouts, and they could get complex as much as you want. And so these layouts, again, you could easily have reusable layouts where you now come and say, look, in terms of my elements, I feel like there's this UI that I will reuse it over and over, and I feel like these effects, I can combine 4 or 5 elements and create something that actually makes sense. And so that's how you'd have it as your atoms, your elements, and your layouts. And so you'd have them as you're composing. That's the order that we are currently using, where we say, okay, fine, let's build out our atoms, and now we have our elements, and now we finally
I think Frank's light is messing him up. Maybe now the electricity is back. To the guys in the call who've interacted with Compose, what's your take on this? Like, how have you been able to implement it and work around it? Harun, do you have any insights on it?
I think we can first start with the audience.
Okay. Okay. I see Prince Robert. Oh, Frank is back.
Well, I feel like I was kicked out.
No way.
Yeah, it should be like you're kicked out of the meeting. So I was like, what's going on? Okay, so let's continue. Yeah, sorry, I hope I'm not kicked out again. Forum rules. Okay.
No one's kicking you out.
I'm finally here. Okay. So when we look at, so I was on this bit where I was explaining about compose and elements and layouts. And so don't worry, when you look at YouTube, we will not have all these breaks in between. So you have compose, atoms, elements, and layouts. So the other bit that you need to think about is that when you're doing your composing, you can have your composables, and these are your elements now, or atoms, and you think about it in terms of, hey, do I have all of this figured out in terms of state also, because that's the other thing that needs to come into bit here. And so when we talk about state, there are different ways in which you can integrate state into your application. One is you can decide, let me just build out the UI like that, then come and have another round of thinking about state for this bits, where it's all like prevents you from starting to think, is this something going to change via state, or do I want it to be fixed? Though for this talk specifically, I will not delve deeper into states, that we don't get that complex into stuff. Though, if you ask me what's the best way to go about it in terms of, do you want to build your UIs fast and then come to another round and say, I want to build out, I've done my UI, they're very static, then I want to add state to these very things. I'll say it's better for you to start thinking, it's like a state first approach in developing your UIs, which is actually better, so that you're deciding as you're looking at these layouts, you're looking at these components, or these atoms and these elements, which are now your composables, and even your layouts, you're looking at it and thinking, will this be something that will be changing, or will this be something that will remain the same way as it is? We can have a deeper conversation about state. I probably feel like this is not maybe the right avenue for us to be deeper into state and conversations about state. for Compose for that matter. So they're not, I wouldn't say like there's this way of thinking. I'll tell you, based on even interactions with the developers within the team at Alicam for that matter, is we have these conversations where we were asking ourselves, they'd tell me like, Frank, don't you think it's slightly harder for us to do this? What are like the downsides for this? And I love the conversations we'd have when you're talking about it within the team, because we were having a very radical shift in a way in which we wanted to develop our applications. So this radical shift, when you look at the ugly side, was that the initial setup time was very frustrating for them, because then they'd feel like, well, we have the UIs already, we can easily just start building it out. And that initial setup time can get frustrating, especially when they're thinking about, hey, we want to ship this, or if one person is working on one thing, and the other one is working on the other element, and things like that. Though there's a counter argument for that, and I feel like the good outweighs the ugly. In that, if you look at the good, one of the things is it's good for larger teams, and for us, we're thinking about right now. We are building this. We are like a very nice 7, 8, 9 people there, and that's already large in terms of like an Android team for it to focus on an Android product. But that's already like large, you know. If you remove the people working on the back end, that's like 3 guys, and so you're left with around 6 people focusing on either web and mobile for that matter. And so the people are consuming the APIs. So like starts to get a slightly larger-ish teams where, you know, you think about you have 20 developers, 30 developers, 50 developers, all maybe working on one application. So how do you, the beauty is that with these larger teams, it helps you so that you do not have conversations, or when you're doing your Q&A or your tests or your reviews, where you're not saying like, yo, we don't feel confident with the color that you used was off. No, you're actually ready, sorry, from the start, that guys already know what they're doing, because they're 100% restricted. The other thing is that when you use this way in which you're using that component first system, is that it's very easy for testing. If you want to test your UI, you start by testing the elements. So if the elements are off, already there's a problem. And so you can easily create test cases for let's say your text fields, your text atoms, your colors, your, you know, even your buttons. Now when you start getting slightly advanced, where it now move from atoms, now you have your from atoms, now you have your elements or your components now, like buttons and things like that. So it's easy for you to also test the buttons, in that now, if the text passed the test, that means you can easily implement it in the buttons. And so you're writing slightly easier-ish tests where you're checking, hey, if I click this, now you've not connected it to anything. Am I getting a reply from it? Or was the button constructed as well as we said it should follow? And you can easily write bits and pieces. I'll use testing, what do you call it, loosely, where to say, if this has not been done here, please do it this way. And so that's the thing with that bit of like making it easier for testing these components. And so you don't need to test like a whole UI and write very long tests. You can easily start writing tests from these atoms and elements that you're actually creating. The other thing is that it also reduces a lot of boilerplate code. And for this, I mean that why should you be defining the same heading, the same header format? Let's say if your header uses a font like Lato, and the size is 25, and yeah, it's Lato and 25. Maybe it's bold, medium, you can put all those thickness and whatever. And so why should I be defining all the time, all across? So everyone is writing 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code just to display a certain string. Why not just say, hey, for every time that you want to display a header, just display this string. We're going to go through a demo and you're going to see how exactly we do it. With these sites like at Alicam. And then reduces boilerplate code. And then apart from reducing boilerplate code, I guess there are other advantages, but these are like the main ones. The fact that it's good for large teams, it's easy for testing, and then you reduce a lot of boilerplate code. In terms of like another advantage also when you're reducing this boilerplate code is that if you're reducing boilerplate code in any application, that means that you're thinking about the times that it will save you when you want to release or to build a product or to code it. So that's what I'd say. So now in terms of code, we have MVVM structures and all those things, but my focus now is probably just going to be on the UI bit, where we look at specifics of this UI bits, and that UI component of like, you know, MVI MVVM or view part. You look at the view part, the I part, that's it, or the MVC. You look at the view part and really delve deeper into that whole UI part, so that guys can get to understand how that is being done. So an example of how that UI layout would look like is you'd have, and let me just explain this before you start getting into it, is that you'd have within your UI elements, you'd have your components, which are not your elements, and then we use component gallery for a reason, and I'll show you why we use it. And then you have your screens, your atoms, and your utils. So why? Let me just go step by step. So you have your atoms explained. This is like type and color. Type is you thinking about what are the text fields that I have within my application and how can I use this over and over. And then you have your utils. So then I'll have my theme, and my theme is a function of me combining my color, my text, and my utilities. I'll show you what the utilities are. And then in terms of like, now you have your screens within the UI, then you have your components. So then you have your components where I take my atoms and I combine those atoms, add extra code, and that's what now I use to build those components. And so an example of a component would be a button, text components where you'd use them there. I know you have type down there and then you have text, and this type and text, the differentiator here is that now when I'm moving from type to text now is that I'm saying, hey, this is what I have within my application. These are the font types, this is where they exist, and this is where now I want to use them. These are the different types of components, because now you could easily have something like think of it like a text button or something like that. That could be one of the things that you would use as a component, or even text of articles or different colors. If you're thinking of applications of this, would be you have others that are a warning text, or maybe you want to put a little bit of bold and all those things. I would rather move that all and say, okay, these are my text components, and then these are the cards, the buttons, the fields, the form fields, etc. And these components can get really big. And so I know some of you are seeing like that component gallery, and you're wondering, what's the work of that component gallery? And normally this is just to lay out all my components. And so easily you can either run that component gallery.kt and just see, hey, this is how they look like. So if a new developer comes in, they'll easily be using that to guide them to see, okay, this is how they are probably doing or laying out, this is how the text looks like, this is how this looks like, this is how this looks like. We can make this even more complex by having different UI screens for like, let's say, all the cards, that they can easily just see how do these cards look like and how do these buttons look like, and all that. Now because of this, there's a library. I think when I started developing this, I was not that aware that there was actually a library that has been developed. If I'm not wrong, I think it's by Pinterest. When I remember what it is, I'll show you, where it takes all your components or your composables and so like helps you to display how they look like. And so helps that developer as they're working, they can easily say like, okay, fine, this is how my library, this is how this component looks like. And this is what like we've sort of like built within the team at Alcamp, where we're saying like, look, before you build a screen, make sure that you're not now coming in as a developer to build out a screen from scratch. No, there's a guideline in terms of like text, in terms of color, in terms of buttons. And so if you're joining the team, you really do not have to know that extra knowledge of anything else. You just come and look at, oh, okay, so if I want to use the button, this I'm using it. If I want to use the spacer, this I'm using it. I'll show you an example of this when I tried to like sort of like recreate a UI screen that I'd seen online, to see how that would be done. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I think for that matter, let's go to like a code demo. That's usually like something that's very important. Let me do the screen switch. 1 second, switch and say. So 1 second, let me switch to that demo. It's not far away. Okay, so I just let me know if it's a problem with, I think my resolution is really huge, so it can get confusing a little bit. Is it visible for people, or it's too small? Yeah, I think
it's a little too small. Maybe you can increase the font.
So 1 second. Let me change the resolution. Yeah, there. Okay. Is that better? That'll be moving a lot. So is that better or no?
It's better from my end. If it's not better, maybe someone can chat.
All right. I'm not seeing anyone saying that it's harder, but
Okay, cool. Let's go with that.
okay, cool. So you have your so how this look like? So this is like a sample. I have this sample on GitHub. So if you go to GitHub and you look for a project called Dashiki, I think you know what Dashiki is in terms of like African wear. It's like a combination of like different clothings and things like that. And so this was something that I was using to sort of like give a demo of why this is easier. And there are different other bits that have come into this. So there are other more complex-ish projects that I do not want to open, but this is like something that is easier to take in. And so if you're still following that whole MVVM pattern, you still have your MVVM still maintained over here. You have your models, your DIs where you put like your data sources and your network modules, and you have them there. And then you have your data sources also, whether it's remote, you have a repository, and then you have a service that's coming and feeding into it. Then for my models, for this sample, like I'm show you like the product, right? And so I've totally disabled this model part where just to show you that you can actually recreate this UI without the need for having so many things. And so if you look at the UI bit, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting in that I'll come and start off with like a UI, and then I'll have my components, my screens, and my theme. And you see the theme sort of like helps to abstract the other bits because the theme is a combination of both the as I said, like atoms, and then you have your utilities to add there. And so for the theme, when you create your default Jetpack project, it doesn't have it looking like this. It looks slightly different. Yeah, that's the yes. I've seen Robert has posted the link, so that's the link. Tamre Dashiki. So if you go to it, you have your theme there. I'll push this code. It's something that I'm trying to like add a combination of different Jetpack components so that I can push them out and people can sort of like use and see that, so like that way of thinking. And if you look at the other projects that I'm working on, they sort of start to follow this structure, and sometimes they change depending on questions that arise within the team, or people sort of like ask you like, hey, don't you think it's better if you did it like this? And then you think about it and you have these conversations with them. And this is hugely UI focused. And so if you look at the theme part, and why this is actually good is like, if you look at the theme part, and then you have the screens and the components. So 90% of the time, I've taken this sample of like a product UI screen. You've probably seen this sample somewhere where someone has tried to build a UI screen that looks like this. Let me zoom out a little bit. Yeah, you have your, yeah, I think you can see it. So you have your UI screens looking something like this. So when you have your UI screens looking like that, is that we have, this would be like a product screen. And so you have all this there, right? And so I'll show you like a sample for how this would work. So you have your cards, and then these cards have a pricing here. And like they look like this. There's probably a sample, like I know there's a sample like this online, and I looked at it and I was picking it up and saying like, okay, how would I redo this differently? And I think like those challenges are usually interesting because it was one of the junior engineers within the team, I think, who asked me like, hey, there's this sample, how would you like transfer or change it to look like this? And this was like me trying to say, okay, this is how you would do it if you're given that code and you need to refactor it. So this is how that UI would look like. And so just like if I to show you is, I won't run it on the phone, and this is the beauty of this, is that you have your products as a title, or these are the ones that are currently available in our outlets. Then you'd have a product and time, and then there's this like offbeat. This one is fixed here, but how do you change it to be slightly off? Things like that. And you have different types of products going all the way down. So that's what you'd have as that UI bit. But then 90% of the time, if the designer gives you this UI to reproduce, my question is, why should you write text products, text currently available, text, then you defining them as you're going on? Why not make it easier for the developers who are coming in within the team? This is slightly for a slightly advanced higher conversation. I really insist on that. This is not for Hello World. This is more or less like you're thinking of slightly, more complex products where you have, this is my UI thing. I want to add this, I want to add that, and move on from there. So you'd have, where you'd start from normally is I'd start by defining the theme here. And so when you come to the theme, is that the theme will really take two features. By the default, you have your purple color. This is what you'd have from Jetpack Compose, maybe. You'd have your dark palette and light palette and things like that. And so they explain to you. And I didn't want to make this that complex. If you want to see like a more complex implementation of how you do the theme, I have different samples on like color, jet theming, there is user auth, they're just online, and I feel like the ones for jet theming is the one that will get that complex, like talking about this. But then you'd have you have your theme here, and remember, with your theme, you can easily define, this is my dark color palette and my light color palette, if you want to implement dark and light theme for that matter. And then you'd have your colors, typography, shapes, and content. So if I come to my atoms, I'd define my type here. So currently I'm just using the default font type that is from Material Design. I'm not changing it. But if I wanted to change it again, I will show you that sample of if I want to change this. I'd easily come and change and define those font types here, name them and call it whatever name I want to call them here. And then colors, I'll come and define them here. So for colors, I also have a demo on colors. It literally is called, I think it's color palette online. I'll show you this GitHub project once I'm done. But if you go to Tamre and you look at them, they're just like there. You look at just the language being used, they're defined inside. And so you'd have your colors predefined there. And I like to separate them in terms of like primary, secondary, things like that. And then I'd move to us having, so once you have the type, so you're wondering what goes into utils. By default, you already have your shape there. And so this one's for shape is me saying, look, I have medium-sized shapes, which will take like a 4DP, or I can even make this to be bigger. And so if it's smaller, so like the edges for that matter, I would say like, look, I want the rounded corner shape to be, I don't know, maybe 5, 4, and then the large ones could take really large figures like 10, and then these ones could take something like a 5. And I'll show you what this means if you change these figures. And so you have your 10, your 0, like, let me leave it at that for now, so that when I do the changes, you can easily see what effect they're having. And then now I come and define, now I've talked about my atoms. And so that's what you'd have in your theme, where the colors, the text are defined there. And most of the time, if you want to change even the way the app looks like in terms of theme and things like that, you're throwing around, you're changing the color, the shade of the color of the application and the font type that you're using there for that bit. And then you have your product UI screen that you are having, right? But then before we get to the product UI screen, we have these components. And so I mentioned you have your component gallery and things like that. So let's look at something like text. And so if you look at text, I'd come and say, I'm composing my texts here. And the way I want to compose them is say, I have my page title, and this page title will take in this, that, and then I style it. And then once I style it, I'll have what's the modifier I'm using. Do I want it to fill the width, or do I want it to be fixed to a certain size? And then I also define the weights here. And so that's all the page titles within my application will be like this, that format. And then the only thing I just put here is you can literally just place like a variable that someone will just come and replace the page title and just moves on from there. And so when you're defining this page title, it's definitely going to be a string. And then you have another one where you have a subtitle, and you also say, okay, fine, if my title is 33, that's the size, then my subtitle is 23. This helps the developers who come into the team so that if they miss out on that UI guide, style guide, and they're looking on the side and maybe they look 23 and they're distracted and they write like 20, it's easy because as you're moving, it's already defined and it's put there. And so their work is just to say, look, this is my page, this is the title, this is the subtitle. And then you'd have your, sorry, I am moving a lot. You'd have, next part is you'd have your let's look at like a button, you'd have your button black where you actually define, I've not put stuff here, but then when someone clicks, what happens? I'll have my icon, my content description here. You can change this to be a variable, and then you put the thing to be black. Same thing to cards. Cards get a little bit complex also. But then you see with my product, I have my product cards, I have my expandable cards. And if you look at the way you start to construct them, when I'm constructing them, is that I'm saying like, look, this is how they look like. I build the UI out. But then in terms of like refilling them, when someone wants to use them, you can have your content defined there, and someone can easily come and put in your descriptions and your text, and then they move on from there. So in terms of like the component gallery, this one is where now if I wanted to build out the UI and say like, this is how the button would look like. When I was doing this, I saw like there's no need for that if you already have previews, or if you're already using your previews here. Because the problem was that now since you're constructing this, you cannot see them here. But then this is a very relatively small project, so there's no need for me to show this sample. Though if you look at the UI in terms of the screens now, if you come back to the product UI screen, is that you'd see we have our product UI screen. The product screen here would take very easily now when you're constructing. So we don't need to write, we don't need to reconstruct the icon, because we have the icon already defined there. We've already created as a composable, and we are calling it like, 1 second. Move this from here. Yes, okay, cool. So we have our icon, and we're already saying what we want the icon to be. And the description is there. We say like, this is an icon. And this content description could take like different things. So that this is just to help the people who are coming in to write the code. Two things, what this content description does. One is, if you look at the developers and they're coming in, they don't know like, okay, what is this? Two, when you look at accessibility, so if you're building your app with accessibility first, because okay, you see at AliCamp we have different types of learners. So we have learners who are impaired with sight, not like that much, but in terms of like color blindedness. Others have a learning challenge in that they don't grasp stuff that fast. But how do you make tech accessible to all of these people? And so if you look at that content description, most of the time, if you're running your accessibility and like you want your app to read or to like pronounce these things that are happening, it will say, oh, this is an icon, or this is this and this, and so you can put it there. Again, very detailed topics to get into, but I was just like trying to like stretch it out and see how that would look like. And so that's what our button would look like. And then again, just going back to that UI screen, the way you're laying it out now, if you look at this page, is that you have, sorry, this UI screen, is that you only have a bunch of things. You have your icon. So why am I using the icon button? D is just the symbol for the product of it also. Let's say this is dashiki, and this is what it is. And then if you hover over it, I've not put a description for this, because normally the best practice, what we have within the team, is that for something like this, if you've like put it there, is please come and explain what it is, so that as someone is using it, like if I come and hover on top of it, I could have this description and say, oh, an icon button is this. And so we like doing this a lot, where we literally just explain what it is, how would you use it, and stuff like that. But this was just to demo how complex we can get with stuff. So you don't need to like put it there. You can explain it to developers there, where when they click and go and look at it, they can see how it was used, how it is constructed, and what are the things. If you want to change it, how would you change it? And that's how you'd have it. And then you have your product screen, where I'd come in place breathing space here. You are probably wondering what's the work of those utils. And so if you come to my utils here, and these utils are in the UI utils. There are different types of utilities that you can use. These are usually conversations we have with some friends who are like, why would you have utils? Why do you have a utils package? And so if you look at the utils here, I've come and defined and say, these are utilities within the application. You want like space in between, you want separators, and so just kind of put them there. Those are things that the UI will use, and you can't really say these are like components or anything like that. They're just utilities that help make the UI better, or make in your construction of components, makes it easier and better for you. And so that's what this is. You'd have your utils there. And so if you look at this breathing space, I've said, okay, look, as I'm constructing, I have my icon on top here. Then I have a breathing space. Then I have my page title. Then I really want to have a separator space, which is different from a breathing space, which is slightly smaller. You could also have it and say, oh, I want to have breathing space 1, breathing space 2. No, you can have, it's again, these are the choices. The words that you use here are what you actually want. And then look at the way you implement like a page title now. If you come to the page title, you're no longer thinking about this in terms of how big it is, but you'd have your page title here, and the only thing it will take is just a string element. That's it. And so what I'm literally doing when I'm composing now, I'm just laying out stuff. So if I was a developer coming and told, hey, you need to implement this, you'll just be coming in and putting that, and then you have your subtitle here, which is the currently available a bit, and then you have your breathing space again, and then you have a product list, and this is like a list. And so with this list though, you see it takes a product card. And this product card here, we've already constructed it on the other side. So a good example for this is that now you have this product card and they come back and they tell you, oh, no, we need to edit something on these product cards here. Maybe change this color of plus here to red or something. We feel like these things are not aligned very well. One is smaller than the other one. You'd easily go to the product card and come and do your changes here. And so you have your background image, your button, your product image, and your item price, and they're all put out here. In terms of data source, you can add the data source here, or you can add it somewhere else. But I just prefer to add them here. Though in our application is that we prefer to put this data class somewhere else, where it just calls this UI bit and it uses it from there. Then as a model for that matter, then you'd have it there. So if I wanted to change those colors, like, I want to change text here, item price is, I can change this and say, I want, maybe we want this change to, what's the margin? Let's turn it to 40. And the moment we turn it to 40, if we come to our product UI screen, we can check it out. There it is, you have 30 and 40. And I think it's already like taken effect for that matter, but then you'd have 20, 30, and then you have a 40 starting from the start there. Same thing, come change something else. Let's see what else can we change here. If you wanted to change the icon, for instance, for the adding of the product, we talked about like that color element, right? So you also come again, you could easily come and define the styles and modify it and add different things to that, that whole bit. 1 second, it's taking a while. Okay. Okay, let me just move on. Just move on here. And then you'd have your images there, and you could change your images. So all your images, you could change them from here. Even your rotations, if I wanted to change from maybe 21 inclination to maybe like 31, or no, this is really huge. Yeah, 21 to like 31. That rotation of it all, how you rotate the products, you could easily do it there. And then you come and put what's the content description, you put it here. Yeah, and then you'd have your text modifiers where you say, okay, fine, I have my item price, my margin is going to be 40. Could have it even bigger, and then you'd have my, you could constrain different things. You'd say, do you want the margin here? Bottom link 220. Here is 40, font size is 24. I could change this. I could also change the color here. So remember this color black now, we don't need to go and type out that code. I'm literally just like calling it from my theme here where I have my atoms. I'll just come and look at my atoms in terms of like color and pick it up from there. So if the designer comes and says, no, we feel like we should change it to lime green, I'd like, oh, okay, fine. And so the reason why I put this 2 here is that I don't like this way of naming ish, because it can get a little bit hard. Because someone can wonder, okay, wait, what purple was it? But if I just put like green this, green that, maybe it's easier. Again, this is maybe it's easier. This is like a convention that we sort of like ended up deciding on at Alicam. So if I change this to lime green, I'll just come to my cards here and just like change this to lime green. And remember, you need to like import this. So I'll just do that, and yeah, I'll import that. And so, yeah, and then I'll import it. And so once I import it, it will definitely change to lime green. I know I need to do a build. Let me change this. Let me change this. 1 second. Yeah. And so you have your cards there. And so if you're to do like another build, you'd actually have your solutions slightly starting to look different from what was there before. So this UI would again start to look differently from the composables that were there. Give it a second. Yeah, so that's how you go about thinking about all these like complexities. And I know it can get easier, harder, depending on how you look at it. It's a very one thing I'll tell you is that this is a very opinionated way of doing things. It's not like I don't like okay, conforming is good, but why not have fun while doing it? Because I feel like now if you have to build multiple UIs, it would be easier that way. When you come to another screen and you say, okay, fine, I got another one where there's like this expandable card there. You could easily just like define what the card is and then you just add the colors there. So if I wanted to change this color, I would easily come back to my card here, and within my cards, 1 second, let's become smaller again. Yeah, I'd come to my cards again, create my cards. Like that's the expandable card. So instead of us having all these 40, 50 something lines of code, I'd easily come and change like, the animations, the expandable state. How do they look like? Put my text, put all that text overflow, have a drop down arrow. And I like doing this bit where, okay, maybe it's because I have that bit of where you're working with other people in the team. You don't want them to spend a lot of time understanding what's going on. Is like you have all those explanations and you say like, okay, this is how we go about building code for that matter. So once you have this put and defined, you see like the shapes, I'll easily reuse that. So I don't need to like think about, oh, how will this look like? So if you have your shapes here, medium, if I was to change this to be, this medium here, so I don't need to come and put a value here. Where I'll go and change those values would not be here, but I'll easily go to shape and say, okay, fine, the designer has now come back and told us, no, we don't want this to be 4. We want this to be, this will be 3, and this will be 7, and maybe this is going to be 10, 9. And so once that is decided, you see, we are not changing anything from here. We come back to our card, we are literally just like checking out our card again. And when it rebuilds itself, it starts to look like that. It's there, and it will change in a second. So that's what all these complexities come in. Let me switch back to the slide, which is over. Yeah. So yes. So then you'd have your thing, your slides there. Let me open my presentation again and do that. And I guess I'm done. I think so, I'm done. Yeah. So 1 second is there, and there you go. Okay, cool. Yeah. So that would be, that would be like the ugly, the good side. And that's how you do for like that code bit where I was explaining what this were. Yeah, and that's, I guess that's the end of the presentation. Any questions or clarifications, please let me know. One thing I really emphasize is it's nowadays it's apparently getting easier to get me on GitHub if you raise issues. But once in a while, I try and get in once in a while, and then maybe you can interact or answer people's questions and things like that. So that's the thing. If you have any questions, please, I think this is the time for it. Yeah. Cool. Anyone who has a question, I want to maybe answer them. In terms of like the repositories, let's see if I can put them up and show you what would be interesting to look at the moment. Yeah, so that's the thing. Candy, I guess I'm done. Maybe you can have that. And I think you'll see like a lot of these things I'm using is like it's drawn from maybe some of those experiences of playing around with a bunch of things. Let me see, color palette. Yes, color palette and the auth sample. Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess I'm done. I think I don't. Yeah, I hope I was not kicked out again and I was talking to myself. Yes. Okay.
No, we haven't kicked anyone out yet. Thank you so much for the amazing session. That was really, really informative. I think from how you are arranging your code and presenting it, it would be really easy if somebody wanted to do like tests, like, I want to do a test on this particular button, so I know like how to go about it quite easily and neatly, if I may say it. I like it when especially like when you're importing your strings and you don't have to like write a whole bunch of long code in one piece of a file. So it looks more yeah. Well,
Let me explain something also, Kelly, in addition. I think I mentioned some certain repositories, which is like there's this jet type, which I don't know, it's private, it's public, it's public. It's still being developed. It's like it's using as you're building some other UI to put it here. I don't know if I've shared it. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's that bit of saying, like, if you look at color, color is jet type will just be like an exploration of like texts only like texts, because someone asked me like, okay, how do you like build an app, or how do you like make text that complex in terms of changing color, changing fonts, changing weights and things like that. And then you have color palette. I feel like is like one of the ones that is like completed at the moment, where it has all these explanations on how would you go about using things like color, what are the thought patterns, what can you use to change color within your application, and how would you actually do an implementation of one, in terms of defining the colors and using them elsewhere within the application. Then Flix Companion is now, it's slightly huge, because then it has all these like different designers. And if you look, like I start from like dribble shots, and then that's when I try and like implement them in terms of like animation and text like that. There's some code that is still being worked on. That's why you see like it paused, because now you asked questions within the team of how would you do this, how would you do that, and then also moving it. I think that's why it's slightly moved slower than anything else. User auth is the one that has this, I think, has more code-ish to an extent, just doing a demo of like registration, sign up for all of them. And yeah, so that's the bit that I would say would be interesting. So in terms of like even adding all these complexities, when now it gets to that point where you're adding tests, you could easily add them even on your YAML files or like your actions file, where it will go through different layers, and then you get to use them. So yeah, I guess I'm done. I've shown that bit. And so if you raise an issue on any one of them, I'll definitely reply to you. So now, yes, I'll keep quiet and welcome any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is nice. At least now people know where to like go and poke you. You remember this before, how Facebook used to have a poke? Yeah. So yeah, that's Frank's GitHub repos. Go check them out, play around with it. I think I saw Robert posting a link to it. So yeah, it's easier for people to also just get on them easily. Do we have any questions, feedback, comments, what you've learned, what you liked? Yeah, please feel free to ask. And also don't forget to sign up to speak if you really want to like give a session on our platform.
I wanted to give a really big shout out to Frank for calling out the use of design systems here, like things derived from Brad Frost's work, Atomic Design. it's a really great way of organizing and controlling your design communications so that your designers don't just give you kind of arbitrary Photoshop pictures, but they've actually thought out what can be implemented using Android or using iOS or using the web. And they agree on the pieces that they're going to use in your app. Totally right that that takes time up front to establish a design system. I think that was the overhead he was talking about. That's not, you can use Jetpack Compose without a design system, but it becomes the same kind of muddy mess you get with any app that grows and grows and grows without constraint on how the screens are designed. I really like how the design system world and the coding world are coming together now with Jetpack Compose, which I think Frank demonstrated really well.
Oh,
so thank you, Frank.
No problem, no problem. Yeah, and also just like to, there's something that myself and Robert, I guess, mentioned on that whole Brad Frost atomic design. There's this book, and I guess to get an understanding is there are these talks. If you just search on it, I guess you're seeing my screen. You can search on just Brad Frost atomic design, and just get to have a look at it. If you can get the book, why not? But like just look at some of his talks that he's given. He's more web, but you'll pick a lot of lessons from that, such that even as you're working as a team, maybe you might feel like, oh, Frank and Robert are talking about Greek stuff, but spending time to just listen to that talk would make it even more interesting. And I think there's also a talk I did in terms of like design system with mobile, but that was with an emphasis on Flutter. Last year, I guess, maybe around this period, last year, when I was really playing around with it for a couple of months, and then I was like, okay, fine, might as well talk about this. I'll try and share those resources after this to the guys who attended the meetup, so that you can have a look at it also. Yeah, cool.
Now, one thing I particularly liked is the way layers of abstraction are built into your code. I mean, it's a great coding technique generally, but Compose lets us structure the UI now with more logical layers than we could easily have done with the old view-based system and custom views. I mean, you could do it. I've seen companies do it where they have their own button, you know, my company button, in which instantiates their branding style or some particular behavior that they want, but it was always hard. Compose makes this a lot easier, and we can now create a great many more layers whenever we need them with composable functions.
Yeah. Kendi, I don't think do you have any other questions? I don't. No, we don't have. Yeah, I'm seeing on the chat. So I'm seeing on the chat where Roland was telling me, oh, that thing is called TalkBack. Yeah, there's that TalkBack feature where, again, some of these things also like touching on are very complex. I tried removing many things because then if you look at that messy bit that maybe Robert's mentioning, is that if you look at how complex you can get with this, is that when you start integrating what is it called, accessibility, and then you have to put your tests and all those things, it starts getting very, very huge. But this is just for, again, this is for as you get bigger, maybe it's better to start from the start thinking that way than if you're thinking of, yeah, we'll just do our text and move on step by step like that. Kendi, I guess we're done.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, also, there's a question. I've seen a question.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so two things. Let me start with the last one. Let me ignore you and start with Andre's question, because Andre's question is I feel like it's easier to explain. I'm new to this stuff. Where can I start? I'll say new stuff in terms of if you want to understand for this, and that's why I started by saying this is not for Hello World. Like my assumption is you have understandings of different things. One is maybe you come from an OP background, let's say, for instance. and this maybe I'm also answering you, Segun, that you come from this background of like object-oriented programming, where one of the principles of OOP is that whole bit of abstraction, and like if you've either played around with it, it's easier for you to understand what maybe we are talking about. But when you talk about where do you start from, Andre? Where do you start from this? Is first just have a general understanding of what Compose is. Spend time in the code labs. Spend time. There's one of these very nice talks I'd actually point you at by. I'll remember the talk, the person who gave the talk, and I'll share that. But the session was, I think it was done by Roland, if I'm not wrong. Jetpack Compose. I'll really look for it. It's a very nice talk. I really love the way it sort of like introduces you to what Jetpack Compose is. It's very nice general talk on YouTube. It was still done when it was still on the beta version of it all, and I enjoyed the way the talk was very, like, it covers so many things. So there are two talks I'd actually point you at. And that is one, spend time looking at all that mad series where they spent time on Jetpack Compose. Then this is from the Googlers themselves. But I don't know, but this talk was very easier-ish to understand and also get up to speed with it. When I look at it again, I'll share these resources with you. So when you start off from there, what I saw was that it makes it easier for you to have that way of, oh, this is how your Compose looks like. And that is just even before you start from Compose. Let me share a playlist that I think I have. I have a playlist that I have set up for Compose that we share with friends and things like that. Let me just share it in the group. I don't think it's private. I think it's public. So let me share with you that screen, Andre. Maybe that would help you out also. And then to answer Segun's question on, I think Segun's question is that, yes, I'm seeing even people are also pointing resources to you. Please use them. I'm seeing Derito has posted, Robert has also posted. Yeah, so look at that. So the bit that I'm talking about is the whole Jetpack Compose, and then there's the design system part. And design systems are different things that you can actually learn. So that's, Andre, that would answer you. New to declarative programming in building UIs. Can you talk about side effects? I came across it and I'm confused about what it means entirely. Side effects, this one, I don't know if you can clarify it further of what exactly you mean, because I think when someone mentions that to me, it's wider. Let me pull that up. Let me pull that slide, not slide, sorry, that YouTube video. Not seeing it. Maybe that would share. Yeah, there it is. Let me share. No, it's a Jetpack. Yeah, Jetpack Compose, and then now I'll share that. This is the talk that I am thinking in Compose. That's what I was looking for. Sorry. It's a 25-minute video that I feel like summarizes everything. I do not have bias towards the speaker. I feel like he gave a very nice talk where he went through everything. And that was like a very nice brief intro on what it is. This is the one. Everyone in the meeting, sorry, I should share the video only, not the whole list of things. So that let me just share the video. Sorry, yeah. So that's the bit. Andre, I guess you're being answered in the chat, so I don't need to really add to what is being answered. 1 second, and I think. Okay, good. And this is, I think this is pre-conversations around. There you go. I love that talk. It was really good. It's a very nice short video that can easily get you started in like understanding it. I'm trying to see whether you've clarified, Segun. Yes.
Also, Frank, I see Robert has posted some really nice resources, as well as Ndiritu and Andrew. There is this atomic design by Brad Frost and
Yes.
build design systems by Vesilov and Davis. They're really good books. Yeah, you can go check them out. Oh, yeah. Also, another thing, there's a book that Harun wrote, but it's not really on Jetpack Compose, right? Would also recommend guys to go check it out and buy it. Maybe Harun can drop the link here. We go see it. I wanted to give out a gift to one of the guys, but I already got someone, unfortunately, or fortunately, to buy the book for. It's really, really informative.
Candy, can I answer what
Yeah,
Segun
sure.
was asking about the side effects? I guess I'm trying to understand if you say side effects within declarative declarative programming, and this is like there's the UI bit and then there's the whole general bit. So when you talk about like declarative bits and we start saying and start focusing more and asking ourselves like, okay, fine, what are these like side effects? It's side effects in terms of it's a broader-ish term within the whole field of computer science. But some of the things I'd say is with regards to like declarative programming, the beauty of it is that you're building like elements of things like that by so like focusing more or less like that bit of expressing the logic or the computation of that bit, or like flows, that whole conversation comes in that bit. Like flows most of the time. And then when you talk about flows, you have to talk about state. And with regards to like declarative programming, when you talk about that whole bit of side effects, you really have to talk about state modification. And that's why I think when I started, I said indirectly that, hey, the conversation on state with regards to Jetpack Compose can really it's really wide. I say that this series of Jetpack Compose talks is something that, again, I'm not doing one-off. It's something that I'm doing, it's like it's bits by bits. So just look out for one of the talks that talk about just like state only, where how do you change state and how should you think state first with regards to like approaching or developing your applications. And so with regards to state, I'd tell you for a fact is that it's very complex. And even in terms of, if you look at the pathways, they start off by UI, and then after UI, that's when now they start talking about state. And I said, when you now are getting into all this state for that matter, I'd say understand just a brief on state is that understand when you want to change your UI elements for that matter, and you're using state will be driven by one, data that is going to be streamed into it. So then you have a text field that is in existence. For instance, if you think of like a news article card, right? You have an app and you have a news article card and you have an image here and text here. And so you want, for that matter, to be, you can always change this with regards to like what makes sense for you. And so you can say, okay, I want this state to be changed when the user does this. Maybe if they stay 4 or 5 seconds online. I'm trying to look for a good example for this. Oh yeah, good. This makes sense. So I want to change this card element such that it will not be fixed, but it will be updated based on what the user has done before. And so this card could be favorites card. And so this favorites card lists down what are the articles that make it easier. What are the things I want to tell this user on this articles card? And so you can say, this articles card, I can use it as a state and say, even in my list element, it's a state in that, yes, I'll load data there, but then there's this one element that says, hey, you've been on our site for this period of time, like what Medium does. You've read 5 articles, 3, it's 3, I think. And so you've read 2 of 3, and so it updates that number and gives them once, twice, 3 times, then tells them do this other thing. And so to implement something like that, you'd have a state where you say, okay, fine, I'm checking how many times the user has hit my server. So once, twice, 3, they're not paid users. And so since they're not paid users, when 1 reaches, I display the card. Or you've read 1 of 3. They read the second one, you've read 2 of 3. they read the third one, you've read 3 of 3. When they try to do the fourth one, now you tell them, hey, by the way, you can't read past here. Please consider creating an account and subscribing and promoting our journalism and things like that. So that's what you do in terms of state. And that's how you think about that whole bit of what you were talking about. Good. Yes, side effects. So let me not cover that right now. It's confuse some people, but it's very complex. That whole not complex. It can get complex, but I feel like once you get an understanding or internals of what state is and how it powers it makes it easier for you. Myself, I came from Android, Core, Java, XML, then went to Flutter for some time. Then Jetpack came back and became stable. And I was like, yes, when you're opening Jetpack, you're like, this is fun, because that's sort of like that's the kind of knowledge that you're using from that bit. Roland has said, speaking of architecture with Compose, do you think event-driven architecture has a better chance of success? We've had MVC, MVI dominating Android for years, and event-driven architecture sort of died because it was harder to manage state. Now it looks easier. Yes, but let me tell you something, Roland, in that MVC and MVI with Jetpack is still possible because of these two things. One is, I'll say it depends on how you're architecting your application. And so with Jetpack Compose, again, one thing I've seen is just because it's not fixed, just because Android or the Android tooling team and the Android team, design team and the whole team that is building that whole bit have decided to say, hey, as you create your default Jetpack Compose project, you see it's already divided for you, where you have your UI at one point and your theme and your colors and everything. So there's also a risk. I think there's some sample I saw where there's a risk of you also turning the whole application to be monolithic, in that there are people I've seen who there's one activity, that activity has so many things, that it has the UI on top, and then it has your model in between there. And it's like a very complex page, and the page and that screen code, all that lines of code can get all the way to like 1,000 plus. And so you're clicking on this, it tells you, oh, it's below here, and then this one's below here, and this one's below here. So there's a risk for that to happen. Though what you're saying is actually true, in that whole bit of event-driven architecture, better chance of success, yes. Currently, yes. Again, because Jetpack is very, very declarative and very opinionated. If you ask me, it's very opinionated. How people are actually executing this or releasing apps to even production or testing is really dependent on how they're doing a bunch of things, or like how are they thinking about state, how are they thinking about architecting the applications, or ease of even breaking down some very things. Yeah, and then Brains is asking, I just want to say complex event-driven, UI events lead to change of state. When this triggers a rendering of the UI, Compose has a lot of pattern vectoring. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, also you've been told, look at side effects. You should look at Nini called Mobius, library called Mobius by Spotify. It demonstrates the difference between the events and the side effects nicely. Okay, cool, awesome. Kendi, I don't think we have any other comment. Or we do? No, we don't. Yeah, I think Roland has answered you. Segun, I think there's an additional comment on side effects that maybe you could look at Mobius by Spotify. It's, I think, done in Jetpack. I've seen it. It's actually done by Jetpack, and it actually helps you to differentiate the two. So cool.
All right.
I'll throw in one additional technique which can be used for color, things like colors. We called it logical color names, but I'm sure other people have other terms for it. Basically, instead of putting a raw color like black, purple, lime green into your actual app code, you define those and say what actual color number they have, but then you define logical colors like the body text color, the headline color, the button text color, your link color. And then you use those logical color names in your app code. That gives you another layer of abstraction that you can modify and gives you specific levers. If you have a brand color and the brand color changes, you can change that in one spot. And but then if you have a use of that brand color and it doesn't quite work and you've got to tweak it somewhere, you tweak that in the logical color layer rather than in the raw color layer.
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Robert, for the insights. I think you've answered most questions with the help of Adam, like Roland and Robert, and these are amazing insights that you guys are teaching us and telling us. We're really honored to have this event. Thank you so much, Frank, for having time to speak to us. We normally hold our meetups every third Saturday, but last Saturday you weren't able to join, and we are grateful that you made it today. Thank you so much once more. Yeah, guys are thanking you a lot. Okay, so if we don't have more questions, I think it's time we end our session here. If you have further questions or you want to like reach out more, maybe guys can reach out to you, Frank, via Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Twitter.
Cool.
If it's code specific, I guess, to be honest, I'll tell you the truth. I feel like nowadays it's easier to see that than Twitter. I'm not on a revolt or anything like that, but that's the thing. The last bit, Kenny, sorry, just before you, it's like there's something that Robert had said that I wanted to like show. So here you see, like, instead of what Robert was saying, like instead of you saying like BG color or white or black or anything like that, you could easily come to this, and change this. Like you see here, this is background color. But I'm calling it weirdly. So you could change this, instead of having teal or purple or anything like that, you could say this is probably paragraph something color text, sorry, paragraph text color, sorry. You could have it like even done like this, such that if I'm doing my implementations here, I could come to my, let's say, my expandable bit here when I'm doing my definitions of what the expandable card would look like when it comes to color. So instead of saying is it, look for it, 1 second. Sorry, I feel like it's fatigue. That's a certain setting here. I think it's going to get some coffee. But you add color to your card, and then once you add it to your card, and I guess this is where let me tell you now where we sort of like now we'll have interesting conversations with someone like Robert if you're in the same team, where I would go for saying I want to define my colors in terms of font. I mean, this conversation can be really long. I kid you not. So you see where you have your text here. I would say, oh yeah, by the way, when I'm making my text, which is my components here, which is here, I've come in and defined it and said, here, what's the color? It's not black anymore. It's paragraph text color. And then again, I've abstracted it even further. Then the other alternative is to say, okay, fine, in your card itself, when you're creating it, you could easily come in and like create or give the color and put it there. So that's why you're saying, like, even those resources that Robert has shared, you'd really learn a lot by just spending time to look at them. Trust me, do not ignore them. And I feel like where we are headed at with Compose, if I look at Flutter for that matter, I'm doing context switching to just explain, like, if you come from that bit, you'll see anytime there's this new way of doing things, initially there's a lot of, everyone will throw in a lot of things, it will become really murky, but then at some point it becomes really stable, standardized, and then it makes sense for everyone. So yeah. Now I am like totally done. I have zero.
I've got one question for you, Frank.
Oh yeah.
Are there any,
like you said, like,
are there any good big code samples that you'd recommend out there for people to look at in terms of seeing really good, well-designed Jetpack Compose code? Something that pushes the envelope and exercises all of its functionality.
Okay, so I'll say personally, one of the benefits I think I got when I was doing the whole switching back into Compose was the Google samples. If you can, you see that let me just open them. The Google samples, the core Google samples themselves. That's one. They will teach you two things. I think with each sample, you'll see go beyond the. Let me just show it. I think the old example is good because that shows you how to do custom themes and not to move away from material design. So it starts to make you think like, okay, fine, if I have a custom theme that I've designed, how do I move from there? Then also, if you can even run the Google samples for Compose, you're in a good position, one. And then larger code bases, to be honest, if I'm to say, Robert, I've not seen anything that sort of like stretches towards this side. Most of them are mostly code, like we are coding as we are going, you know, like they're very nice samples. Like I like this guy called Skydoves. Skydoves is good. He has libraries. He's done samples like Pokédex. Then there's also this, let me just see if I can pull them up. But in terms of like one specific one, I wouldn't say there's one go-to. It's still really, really murky at the moment. I'm seeing so many things happening at the same time. Design systems, I can point people to a specific place or specific examples or samples on how those are being done on a large scale. That is, you look at the whole design system, which is like, they'll show you from a designer's perspective. Yes, there it is. Yes. That whole Compose samples that Robert has shared, that's a very nice one. And specifically, if you look at, let me see if I can pull up. Let me just share my screen. If you can see my screen. Share the screen here. Yes. So if you look at this sample, specifically look at all, and I think Jet News, they help you do the whole custom bit plus, what was the other one? This one here, the one on Jetcaster. So look at Jetcaster. If you can look at Jetcaster and all, those are like the ones that actually tell you focus more on that because they show you how to do the whole bits. Because there's this very nice effect where it changes color based on the image, and the talk here is also given by where is the YouTube bot? Yeah, so Jet News, and they explain what it is here. They tell you, oh, Compose is a typical material app. So this one, if you want to stick to the material UI and just like go deeper and spend time looking at this. If you can run these samples, try see if you can modify this, try see if you can build more or less like the same app on your own and trying like to learn how they're doing those bits. Jetcaster is an advanced one. If you're starting out, just try play around with Jet News, JetChat and Jet Survey. Jet Survey and JetChat are easy for you to understand. When you start playing around with JetSnack, Jetcaster is complex. Rally is easier also, and then they also explain here the level of complexity. Same to all is also medium complexity. And then there are all these other samples of components, and I guess even looking at these components, you can easily start to say, hey, you have a certain way of doing things. Like right now, I think there's some friends of mine when we work together, they're always like, okay, dude, look, either you start this project, we join you after 3 weeks or 2 weeks, or when you start off with you, we do not want to see your design things here. Just take them and throw them away. But then the problem is always like further down the line, people are always like, okay, why are you doing this? And I think you'll see from my samples on GitHub, both for Flutter and Kotlin, I am heavily like, this is the way I'll do things, and this is just the way I'm going to focus on doing stuff like that. But like the samples that I've told you, those Compose samples are good, though they show you how they're trying to implement those versions of design systems with material design being at the front of it and you can start to think about modifying, combining this, looking at the talks by Brad Forst, looking at what we've talked about today, and trying to sort of like modify this would be really good. But you really have to have that solid like a fundamental understanding of what Compose is in that matter. I hope I've answered the question, Robert.
Also, maybe I can add to the samples.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Frank, for the session. I think since you joined Flutter, you've been a big advocate for design system, and yeah, I think by now I've already bought it since we have Compose. So thank you for the session, and also for those who've been also contributing, Robert, Roland, and the questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, so regarding a sample, and I will say this is not like a paid, is it like a promotional sort of thing? We have a Stream SDK. They're doing kind of, they have a chat SDK, which was in XML previously, but they ported it to Compose, the UI bit. I've written a couple of blogs with them. So at least I've seen the Compose in action, and I would say it is like a good example for something in Compose, which is not maybe probably from the Google team, but from other people. So what they have is like building UI components in Compose. And from my experience, it has been like a bit way easier when you compare the experience with Compose versus the XML, because you get to see like the real power of Compose in action. I'll share the link in the chat. So probably for those who will be interested to see Compose in action, you can maybe check it out, because the SDK is open source. You can view what they're building and what you can be able to achieve with the SDK. But again, this is not like a paid promotion. It's just that I have interacted with the SDK, and I've seen how easy it is to build things with Compose. And it also gives you that experience of building like in Compose. I think the team has also done a couple of talks. You can search online and maybe get to hear their feedback on building an SDK. I think it's the first one so far with Compose. Thank you. Yeah, let me share the wrong link, but I'll share.
Yeah,
Yes, I'm done.
thank you. Yeah, I've seen it, Harun. I think this Compose has so much that really needs to be spoken about, especially to guys who are starting it off. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So if we do not have more questions and more things to add it on, I think it's time we end the meeting. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. We are really honored to have you all. And also another thing is having an awesome co-presenter, my grandma. She's so hi. She's been enjoying and seeing all of you, like seeing things, people on the screen, and you guys talking. It's been an amazing. She's more than 100 years. Okay, so thank you guys for that, for joining, and we're looking forward to hosting you next month. Bye.